Hey, everybody, some cool news about the pod before we get going on today's show. Ion College Basketball is again a finalist in the Sports Podcast Awards in the category for Best Basketball Podcast. So, in an effort to do some PSA work this time around, we wanted to get the word out. And by that, I mean we're doing it in the final week of voting. If you're watching on YouTube, you see a QR code right over my right shoulder here. Feel free to tap that and head on through. If you are listening to this podcast on your phone, on a tablet, through any podcast provider you use, go to the episode description of this show. We will have a link to the Sports Podcast Awards site where you can go and log your vote. I've already done it. It takes less than 60 seconds to do. They tell me that these awards are entirely determined by fan votes, so let's go out and prove that. There's more of us than there are of them, and if we wind up winning, who knows? Maybe we'll finally actually start making and selling t-shirts related to the show that you can wear proudly. But regardless, appreciate you so much. Because of our listenership, you make this possible. So go ahead, go vote often, tell your friends. Appreciate you. And now let's get to the show.
Hey there, it's Gary Parrish. Welcome to the CBS Sports Ion College Basketball Podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting, dodo birds, and leaky black. Matt Norlander is here with me, and we're going to be here on CBS Sports Network for the next hour discussing all things college basketball, where, believe it or not, the SEC has emerged as the best conference in the sport and possibly the best ever. So, Norlander, let's start here. There are lots of ways to illustrate how the SEC is the best conference in the country. Among them, a bracket expert here at CBS Sports, Jerry Palm, currently has 12 SEC schools projected to make the 2025 NCAA tournament. As you know, no conference has ever sent more than 11. So for folks, Norlander, who maybe haven't been following college basketball as closely as the rest so far this season, what's your best explanation for how the SEC became college basketball's best conference?
The coaching upgraded. The NIL situation across the board in this conference had significantly upgraded over the past couple of seasons. And I mean, some of this stuff is coincidental, but a lot of it isn't. I think the fact that you had a lot of schools with really good coaches and a lot of financial backing led to this. And it's become arguably the story in the sport through the first, 2+ months of the season to see how dominant the SEC has been overall, GP. And non-conference play has wrapped up. The SEC, 185-23 overall. That's the best. That's just an outrageous record. Every time I look at that, 185-23 for a 16-team league. There had never been a league with at least 10 teams that won a high percentage of its games in non-conference play prior to the NCAA tournament than the SEC this season. So you mentioned Palm's got 12 in the bracket. I agree with that. I said recently on CBS Sports HQ, I think that 12 is going to happen. 11 is a lock. I mean, the way the math is going to break, 11 are going. It's going to at minimum tie the Big East record. I think 12 is probable, and I think 13 out of 16. I think that's possible. So it's been an incredible year so far for the SEC, and now it is unfortunately fated to go 500 the rest of the regular season because the teams got to play each other. But in that, most of these are going to be quad 1 and quad 2 games, and so a rising tide will lift most boats here, and the conference will benefit. And I can't wait to watch what plays out in this league tonight, and then across the next 9 weeks before we get to Selection Sunday.
Well, you mentioned the coaching upgraded. I think that's undeniable. You referenced NIL. That's clearly a factor. Both of those things are tied to one thing: money. Money is how the SEC became the best conference in the country. And just to put some numbers on it right now, the SEC has 2 of the top 3 teams in the net, 4 of the top 9, 7 of the top 17, 14 of the top 47, and only 1 school outside of the top 62, which means right now, all road games in the SEC, other than a road game at South Carolina, is a quadrant 1 opportunity. So, yeah, schools are going to start losing because they have to play each other. But just about every loss you take, especially every loss you take on the road, is going to be a quality loss. And the wins are going to be big wins. And so these SEC schools are going to put together remarkable resumes in advance of Selection Sunday. And that's how they will probably get a record number of teams in the 2025 NCAA tournament. Just to zero back in on the NIL and money factor of this, I think it's interesting. If you look at the top of the SEC, where you have not only 5 Final Four contenders, probably more, but I think at least 5 true national championship contenders. Most people would put that list in some order of Tennessee, Auburn, Alabama, Kentucky, and Florida. Most people would consider those the top 5 teams in the SEC right now in some order. The leading scorer at each one of those places is a transfer, and is often a transfer from a mid-major. At Tennessee right now, leading scorer Chaz Lanier, transfer from North Florida. At Auburn, leading scorer Janai Broome, transfer from Morehead State. At Alabama, leading scorer Mark Sears, transfer from Ohio. Kentucky, leading scorer Otega Owe, transfer from Oklahoma. At Florida, leading scorer Walter Clayton, transfer from Iona. So those are arguably the top 5 teams in the SEC. None of them are led by 5-star freshmen. Most of them are led by older, experienced transfers, usually mid-major transfers, and it does really appear to seem like that's where we are at in the sport right now. If you were trying to build a real national championship contender, it is built through the transfer portal, not through the high schools anymore.
Right, with a little bit of sprinkling of high-end freshmen having an impact there, because actually across the board, as an aside, oh, by the way, and we'll get to this on the podcast, not today, but later on this month, freshmen have been tremendous. The freshman impact across college basketball is noticeably better and more profound than it's been in recent seasons, but still, the point GP's making is really been the formula here within the SEC and generally speaking across the sport. Also, this is the last year of COVID eligibility. So in the 2021 season, there were still just a huge spate of games that either got postponed or just canceled altogether. It wasn't a full season. So the NCAA determined that every single NCAA athlete that was eligible during 2021, that did not count against your clock. This is the final year you get the bonus eligibility. And so as a function of that, you mentioned guys like Clayton, you mentioned guys like Broome, Chaz Lanier. There's a lot of them across the board who are getting that extra year of college. Mark Sears is another one, getting that extra year of college basketball. And as a result, by playing in the sport as 22, 23, 24-year-old men, I happen to think it's a very good thing for college basketball that we're having older players in a sport that has been afflicted to a certain extent with having, not just the transient element of it, that you're not going to get rid of that, but the one and done, the superstar or the star kind of players, GP. Well, on the back end of that, getting guys that are still sticking around for 4 or 5 years and getting to know them all the more and having a familiarity with them helps the sport overall. And for the context and purposes of the SEC, it's been a big thing. We talked about something on a recent episode about the SEC and its chances in the NCAA tournament. You mentioned right now, conceivably at minimum, 5 national championship contenders. Would you take an SEC team or the field to win the 2025 Big Dance right now?
I think what history would tell you and smart people would tell you is that you should always take the field over any conference. Obviously, always take the field over any team. But this is obviously a place where it's at least worth a discussion. Again, right now, the SEC has 2 of the top 3 in the net, 4 of the top 9, 7 of the top 17. If you don't stretch true national championship contenders out past that too far, which a lot of different teams could make Final Fours. We saw that last season with NC State. But if you're really going to win 6 games in the tournament, cut nets on that first Monday night in April, you typically got to be borderline top 20 and probably better than that heading into it, probably much better than that heading into it. So let's just cut it off and say the SEC has 7 of the top 17, nearly half of the top 17 teams in the country, according to the net. I think I'd still maybe take the field over the SEC, but it's close. It's and arguably closer than it's ever been for any conference in the history of the sport.
Yeah, when we talked about this previously, I took the SEC for fun. I'll stick with that. By the way, the SEC right now, 14 of its 16 teams rank in the top 50 of most and or all 7 team sheet metrics. So beyond the net, KenPom, KPI, Torvik, etc. It's incredible. Tennessee, of course, the last undefeated team. We'll see if that's true in 24 hours. The most common result, if you're curious, I do this analysis every so often. I'll have something on this on the court report at cbsports.com on Wednesday. The most common result in March for the last undefeated team in March Madness over the past, 35 or so years is a loss in the Sweet 16. So GP, over, under, or push, the Tennessee Volunteers making the Sweet 16. If you go over, that's beyond that, under, a first or second round loss, or a push for the number 1 Vols in your poll and the AP Top 25.
I'll go over that. I think Tennessee is at least back in the Elite 8 and possibly further. I think this is the best team Rick Barnes has ever had at Tennessee. It might be the best team Rick Barnes has ever coached in his career. I'm a believer. I know that he has stumbled some in that bracket throughout his career in a way that maybe makes some folks skeptical that he'll be able to maximize whatever this team's potential suggests is available. But I'm a believer in this team. I think Rick Barnes has got a real national championship contender, and I'll be, frankly surprised if he's not at least in the Elite Eight, while recognizing, the variance of the NCAA tournament. Tennessee projects as a 1 seed, and I'm going to assume that a 1 seed is going to get to the Elite Eight.
Well, and his history as well in the tournament. I mean, he's barely over 500, a really, really good career, but March has been his bugaboo. You think this really could be his best team he's ever had? Because he's had not just Texas, but Tennessee. He's had some really good teams seeded, near the top line. If not, he's had a couple of number 2 seeded teams. This one obviously pacing to be number 1. But you really believe right now we'll get to March and say this is the group he's never had a team this good?
I really believe it could be. I mean, he's had other number 1 ranked teams before. He's had a Kevin Durant team before. He's had a Final Four team with a National Player of the Year and TJ Ford before. But this team is, sitting here as the only undefeated team in America, number 1 in most human rankings, and very much looking the part of a legitimate national championship contender. I don't know. Let's talk again in March. I know we will. a lot. But right now, they got a chance to be the best he's ever had, and a team that could absolutely win 6 games in that bracket. Let's move on.